today. I hope now we're going to learn something really very different from what we've been learning before. We are moving to the relationships topic, and this is all about building relationships with your SME or subject matter experts. And for discussing this topic, we've welcomed on board a real expert on the relationships with experts. This is Tom McDowell. Tom, do you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Fantastic. How are you today?
Very good, thank you. Very good.
Great. I'm absolutely happy to yield the floor to you, which is more, you have a fantastic microphone. So the floor is yours, Tom. Enjoy it.
Awesome, thank you, and thank you to you to everyone at iSpring for organising this as well. I know from personal experience these are not a small job to organise and run, especially to run it as smoothly as this has gone. So congratulations and thank you for that. Hello to everyone in the chat. I feel like the first question we should probably address, because I know more than all of you are probably thinking it is, who's this guy? To cut it short, basically I have internet access and therefore get to talk to people. That's pretty much the level of qualification we're talking about here. In actuality, I've spent the last decade working in performance support, learning development, instructional design, really focusing on how can we genuinely make a difference in a business? How can we make sure that everything we create as instructional designers, LXDs, ISDs, insert job title here, has maximum impact. And I've done that in industries as far apart as sales and customer services to utilities to hospitality and healthcare and aerospace and everything in between. And what I've learned in all that time is, first of all, a lot of what has been created doesn't deliver value. And one of the leading causes of that is poor SME relationships. Thus what we're talking about today. Other reasons you may want to listen. As I said, I am the Chief Learning Geek at Evolve Learning Design. We're a small learning consultancy in the UK. I'm the head of learning for iLearning. I co-host the ID Update and have the IDT YouTube channel. So if for some reason you still want to listen to me more after this time, just head on over there. I'm not sure why you'd want to, but there you go. And we're going to kick it off with me talking as little as possible. So what I'd like you to do, in the chat, describe your SME relationships, and I get they're all slightly different, but just broadly speaking, average them out in your own mind. Describe them in 3 words or less. Some of you may have one immediate word in mind. Some of you may need to think about it. That's absolutely fine. Chuck them in the chat. And when I say think about it, genuinely do think about it, not just your initial gut reaction. Just take a moment and really consider those relationships. And we're going to do this a lot during this session, not necessarily put it in the chat. We're going to ask you to really consider and reflect, because as a rule, everyone, certainly that I speak to, tends to think their SMEs and them get on really well, until they ask the SME what their opinion of that relationship is. Then it changes a lot. So it's really important that we take the time to reflect on this. And Chris, when we start seeing any responses, please do jump in, and that'll kind of be the rule for this session for everyone. If you've got a question, chuck it in the chat. The last thing we want is for this to be me talking to you for an hour. I don't want that. You definitely don't want that.
I won't let it happen, Tom. Never,
Excellent.
never, absolutely not. We do have the first answers already, but just building on what you have said about take it seriously, think about it genuinely. Feels like we need this, again, self-awareness practice. Breathe in, breathe out, close your eyes, and think of your SME. So we have the first responses, which are friendly, efficient, productive, as one person answering, Catherine. Susan says it's all about complex, layered, and nuanced. I love this vocabulary. Louis says it's challenging. Juventus says somewhat professional. John mentions it's authentic, appreciative, and open. Oh, I wish it was like that for everyone. And Sean
right?
says, yeah, exactly. And Sean says it's challenging, necessary, and worthwhile. It feels like we have an adjective competition in this chat, Tom.
Absolutely, yeah. He's got the next kind of load of Pulitzer Prize winners here in the audience. To be honest, I'm not going to be using big fancy words like that, so don't worry. You guys can bring the smart, and I can just move the slides along. That's fine. So yeah, I think it's interesting because it's always really difficult to look at your SME relationships and assess them in detail, largely because, some of us who maybe work internally within one set business will have maybe 5 or 6 SMEs that we work with regularly. If, like me, you work in a scenario where my business comes in to help other organizations, you're often building relationships out of nowhere with no pre-existing kind of framework for that. Comes of its own and different challenges, but so do the internal relationships. And I was really pleased to see that we didn't get a lot of very negative language, which you quite often get when you ask people about SMEs. We all know, as people who work in L&D, you scroll through social media, there are plenty of jokes about SMEs. There are also plenty about instructional designers, though. And this session, I really want to look at how you can improve those relationships, but also that it's not all on us. I think it's very easy, and certainly I've been guilty of it, is give L&D the blame. L&D will catch the blame for poor SME relationships, ineffective learning solutions. And don't get me wrong, sometimes we are to blame and we should own that. But other times it's important to be able to identify, is this person a real SME or are they a volunteer? Are they, they've got the time, so therefore they're the person to do it kind of SME. We're going to have a look at that today as well. And
Tom, may I interrupt you just for a second, because it feels like we've received a very interesting piece of content in the chat. Feels like you might build upon that. It might enrich your story. We have received a message from Christina who said, I don't have official SMEs, and I really like every single piece of this answer. It feels like you might use it for your further discussion. I don't have official SMEs, but the people I try to pull experiences from are petulant and typically unhelpful. That's what she says. And one more comment from Sarah. She says, busy, helpful, but sometimes unreachable. And I think that's also pretty illustrative.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that those who have really good relationships, I think you can be quite quick in your answers. It's interesting they came in later. And thank you for being honest about that, because it's not always easy to put your hand up and say, hey, my SMEs aren't perfect. And I can say it about my own business. We're going to touch later on some of the biggest failures in my career of building SME relationships and what I learned from them. Because telling you about how great I am and how everything's perfect doesn't really help anyone, does it? So please do feel free, if you want to offer up a story and be open and honest about maybe when it's not gone quite so well, feel free. We can all look a little bit daft together. That's okay. It's good for us. But I really want to just cover off one point right at the start before we dive into frameworks and types of SMEs and what you absolutely should do. Here be dragons. And I am not talking about the SMEs here. What I really want to make everyone aware of is everything I say today is caveated with the terms "in my experience" and your mileage may vary, because I do not work in the same organization as you. I do not have the same SMEs as you. Myself and everyone here will communicate in very different ways, and that inherently means we have to build relationships in different ways. You will also have different types of SME, and everything we talk about needs to be balanced between all those variables. It's essential when building any kind of relationship, but I think especially SME relationships, that you do not just try and use a cookie cutter out of the box. Well, first I say this and then I say that, and then I go to the next thing. We've all seen those templates online. And if you've ever tried to use one, you know they don't really work, because it's very obvious to you and to the SME you're working with that you're following a multi-step program you've downloaded rather than just actually building a relationship. So if all else fails, just remember today, here be dragons. You will disagree with me on some stuff. Some stuff will fly in the face of your experience. Hopefully you'll agree with me on some stuff, and some stuff we can discuss and meet in the middle on. So let's get started with types of SME, because this is a stage where I think we skip ahead. Sometimes it's because we are given an SME. This is the SME you are having, whether you like it or not, whether they are right for the job or not. But it's still worth really being able to identify what kind of SME that person is. So this is, again, very broad, but I use the terms technical, functional, and sentinel. My technical SME, they are the content expert. They are the, if you like, archetypical SME. They know absolutely everything about this topic. They know it inside and out. They've dealt with it for a long period of time, and they've actually done it. It's not just a case of they've read a lot of books about it or they've researched it. They genuinely have experience working in this realm. Next type, functional. Functional SMEs for me are actually all about audience input. There we're talking about, how does this land on the ground? What does this process really look like in this specific business? These are your SMEs that might actually not have all the technical information. They might not have years of experience, but it doesn't take any of that to tell you, oh, well, actually, that button hasn't worked for 6 months in this computer system that they use every single day. So you can see how this could almost be your world of user interviews, those kinds of SMEs. I think we often kind of don't promote them to SME status, but they really are. Their expertise is just in the real working environment as opposed to the theoretical technical one. Both great types of SME. Then we have sentinel SMEs. This is a nice word, as opposed to what some of us may call these people. These tend to be stakeholders, board members with absolutely no relevant information to provide or help to offer your project. They just want to be involved so that they can tell another board of people they were involved. And these people, whilst they can't actually help you in terms of your content or your delivery, they aren't completely without value. Having a big name Sentinel SME attached, whether they're a finance director or an operations director or a leader of such and such a department, can give you a certain amount of cachet, as it were, when you go to project meetings, board meetings, or when you need something to get done. If their name is attached to your project, they may not be able to help you directly, but your ability to say, hey, so-and-so is involved in this project, you better get this done, goes a long way when you're running up against things like institutional delays, departments that don't want to support your initiative. So whilst they initially seem unhelpful, they can bring you some value. Now, I said at the start, it's not just about choosing your SMEs. If you're given an SME, to me, job one is always figuring out what kind of SME you have been given, because there is absolutely nothing worse than going to, say, your Sentinel SME and asking them for content input, because one of two things will happen. Either they'll turn around and say, yeah, I can't help you with that. Not much time wasted, but it's still frustrating for everyone involved. Or worse than that, they'll have a guess. Because often, especially in senior leadership, it's quite difficult to turn around to someone and go, I know absolutely nothing about this topic. So it's really important to identify your type of SME as early as possible in the process. And that ultimately is all about having an open and honest conversation with them. Going into that, there are also motivators, and motivation for your SME matters. And these are kind of like subtypes. They apply to all of those three we just spoke about. You must identify what is motivating this person to be an SME for you, your project, the business. So the four things I think about are they internal or external? Are they drawn from within the organization or function or team and are there to support you in helping that same function or team? Or are they external? Has the business hired them to come and be an SME for you and their organization? Neither one is inherently better than the other, but you can immediately see how they're going to be involved in very different ways. That internal SME is going to be very motivated to help their own function, their own team. An external SME, however, may be motivated by the fact that they've been hired to do the job, but they're unlikely to want to go that extra mile in terms of figuring out, what does it look like on the ground? they don't have the experience of doing it within your organization. It may just be that it takes them slightly longer to get up to speed. No problem if you know it's there from the start. The other two are paid and volunteer. It is my personal opinion that wherever possible, SMEs should be paid for their time. Not because people who aren't do a worse job, but because it puts them under increased pressure. If someone is a volunteer SME, they're working in the business, they're not really getting any time off from their actual job, they're just doing this as well, then you're always going to get a split down microcosm of their time. If, however, the business says, well, actually, you work 40 hours a week, but for 10 hours a week, you are now the SME on this project, although they're technically not being paid more than they otherwise would, they are being paid for their SME time. It is now an official part of their job. When we mentioned in the chat about SMEs being unreachable, this is why. Quite often. Sometimes it's deliberate, but we're going to assume good intent all round from the majority of this conversation. Because ultimately, if you've got someone who intends to just hold your project up and be difficult, none of this will really help. That's just someone who shouldn't be an SME. And then you need to go down the route of speaking to the project owner, potentially the project manager, and seeing if they can be removed or changed or something like that. But assuming good intent all round, you're going to want to have that conversation around what time can you and can't you give. And if that time is portioned out of their paid work, you're going to have a much easier time and come to an easier understanding. Or ideally, if they're a professional SME, then they're just being paid for their time and they'll always be available to you. So 3 types and 4 motivations. Identify the type, identify the motivation. Once you've got that, you can really get to grips with what this SME can do for you and why they want to do it. And as we all know from the world of learning design, once you've got the what and once you've got the why, it's very easy to get people to work with you compared to when you're working blind. So, next up, let's talk about making friends. Literally, no one likes that person that only gets in touch when they need you to help them move house, right? We've probably all got that person somewhere in our network. And come on, they're there because no one's not polite enough to say, everyone hates you, leave us alone. No, but we all want to. And that's the worst thing that can happen between you and SMEs. And this is focused more in the world of internal at this point. However, if you are thinking, well, I'm external, I don't get to work with the same SMEs all the time, that's only partially true. Think about professional SMEs or clients that you keep going back to and how you can maintain those relationships. I always use the example of a GDPR SME. That's her full-time job. She just goes from business to business being a full-time SME. I always maintain a great relationship. First of all, there's a decent chance that we'll end up working on the same project by, literally happenstance. But also, I know that if I ever end up on a GDPR-related project that needs an SME, I can potentially try and bring someone in that I've already got a great existing relationship with. So this does apply both ways, but I would admit more when you're working internally. And the 3 real keys to building these great SME relationships is that it doesn't start the day they become your SME on this project. It should start from day 1. When you go into a business as a new member of the L&D team, or if you've been there a while, you choose to quote unquote restart your relationships after this, there are some key things you want to go out and do. Identify people in your business that are either potential SMEs or useful contacts. I'm talking, your people working in data protection and compliance, cybersecurity, IT, your heads of departments, your prominent team leaders, and start building that relationship there and then. Don't make the first interaction, hey, can you help me with something? Instead, make that first interaction, hey, I'm from L&D, or whatever your team department is. We're here to help you. Is there anything I can be doing right now to make your world better? That is a much better opening than, hey, can you give me 10 hours of your time next week to action map out this content? That is a big ask. And if you're asking that from no existing relationship, there's a solid chance that even if they're forced to say yes, really they want to say, shove it, I'm busy. because just like you, they work 40 hours a week as well. They haven't got a spare 10 hours. You sure don't. So why would they? Always bear that in mind. Don't make the first step in your relationship and ask. Make it, what can I give to them? So then we move on to the next step really over time of generating social capital. And this is one of those things where people either heard of it or they haven't. Sort of let me know in the chat if it's something you've come across before, I guess. But the principle of social capital is that relationships are just like a bank account. There's capital in and capital out. Going back to what we just spoke about, if you have an empty bank account and you say to the bank, hey, can I have some money? The answer is no, or you're in overdraft, which is a negative thing to be in. That costs you more in the long run. Social capital works in exactly the same way. So you want to spend as much time as possible building social capital with the business and individuals within it, so that when you do have an ask or when something doesn't go perfectly, you've not got an empty account. You can draw on that. We all kind of fear those moments where a project is going to be late to be delivered. But that's less of an issue if you've got a massive pile of social capital saying always delivers on time, helps the business, goes out of their way to support others. Hey, this project's going to be a week late. Okay, so maybe he doesn't always deliver on time, but you're still going out of your way. Or, hey, I need extra input from this SME. It's going to be a big job. I need to pull them out of the business for several days to do a big workshop setup. Okay, you've built that capital. You can pay for that. Never try and operate on zero social capital. Just out of interest, Chris, was there anyone in the chat that had come across social capital before?
We haven't received the answer so far to this exact question. Maybe we needed just a little more time because of the delay. But I just want to clarify for those specifically sorry about that. Specifically asking about the other little issues. They're asking about the subject matter expert being a term that is used for different industries. And I just want to give them a tiny little bit more of time to express themselves. So maybe Absolutely. We could so far specify that subject matter experts, social capital building is perhaps no different from social capital building with any other counterpart in your business. Isn't that the case, Tom?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think in this sense, you don't want the SME relationship to purely be an SME relationship. You want it to be a colleague relationship. Yes, their job title might be SME and the scope of the project, and yours might be, I don't know, learning geek or instructional designer or e-learning developer or whatever it might be. But ultimately, your colleagues, your partners working to achieve a goal. And one of the next things we're going to talk about is making sure that goal is clearly set. But while we're waiting for everyone to respond, then let me move on to the next point, which is the last one on this slide. Always be easy to work with. One of the biggest holdups when you speak to SMEs, which was an enjoyable task I set myself before running this, I actually spoke to 105 professional SMEs. Their biggest gripe, their biggest issue with working with people in the L&D world is when we're not easy to work with. And their big things there were forcing them to work in ways they were unfamiliar with, using jargon or unusual ways of working, forcing them to read texts ahead of time when what they were supposed to be bringing was their expertise, not on-the-spot research of some instructional design format. The best example I gave was that someone asked an SME that before they came to the initial meeting, could they read Map It by Kathy Moore? That's a big old book. And quite frankly, as the L&D professional, that's your job to know that stuff. And I'm sure no one here would do that. But you can see how, I would have no hesitation if someone joined my L&D team to say, hey, before you run the first session, I need to know that you've read this, that you get it, that you can action map any content an SME brings. I would never expect an SME to go, oh, action mapping, I know that. That's an unreasonable expectation. I assume every SME, it's their first time working with a learning and development partner. Because that way, I don't assume they know what learning objectives are specifically. I don't assume they know what action mapping is. I don't assume that they know the difference between, synchronous, asynchronous, e-learning, a blended approach, a workshop. You've got to take it right back and just say, hey, whatever works, we want to get the best possible result. However we get there is somewhat irrelevant because the results are what the business wants to see. And that is usually what an SME will view this project as. The project is a vehicle to deliver this result. The issue we sometimes have as learning professionals is we're thinking, yes, but learner engagement and this project going on here and this modality and this technology. And we forget that the SME doesn't see any of that. They see where they are and the end result. And they want to know, what do you need from me to get yourself there or get the business there?
Exactly. So, Tom, thank you for explaining this. Meanwhile, I am very happy to announce that we have received several very thoughtful answers. I think people are just following your advice. They are not just answering, they are taking time, processing your question, thinking, breathing in, breathing out, doing several pranayamas, breathing exercises, and only then getting back with the answers. So brilliant. I think several answers are actually pretty provocative, so I think you might take it from there. Let me read them out loud for you. So A. Powell says, current issue is extracting knowledge from several SMEs before retirement. No appreciation for management on time, actually required to download knowledge to an ID. Frustrating for all involved. This is what we have shared. Terry says, we, IDs, need to show that we genuinely care about what the SMEs do. Yeah. Susan mentions, I have found that taking some leadership courses helped me develop skills to build social capital. I think this is a fantastic answer. And one more, which I like the best because I think it can get us somewhere really interesting. Perhaps it was on your next slides, but Catherine says, I had not heard that term, social capital building, but I've always realized the importance of making attention friends. And I think you might specify here the difference between friends, partners, and maybe stakeholders. And it also could be very cultural relative, right? Because in some cultures, it is important to make friends compared to just making partners. So anyway, leading back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll touch on that last point first, because we have a kind of saying, and I picked it up way back in literally the first job I ever had, was that in our business, with people that we work with, we're friendly, not friends. And what that means is, it's very difficult sometimes if a friend has done something that is wrong, not just that you disagree with, but is wrong. It's quite difficult to tell them that. It's very difficult to say to a friend, hey, you're actually really bad at this, so I'm kicking you off this project. No, you make them like the drummer or the bassist in the band. You don't actually get rid of them. So it's really important that whilst we want to make friends, it's actually more important that we are friendly with our SMEs, our colleagues. If we get too close, it can become difficult to be honest. So really, really keep an eye on that. And that's why I like the social capital model, because it is the idea that ultimately this is a relationship based on exchange. I want your time, and therefore I'm willing to offer my time or my expertise, and whatever you may be offering in return. I want you to support me helping the business, so I will help you in your efforts to support your team or drive change or whatever it might be. So it's always an exchange. It's not favors or helping out. That's a dangerous place to be in. If someone's doing you a favor, it's very difficult to say, hey, you've let me down, and that's a problem because, hey, they were doing you a favor already. You've got to make that an exchange-based relationship. And actually, the person who spoke about the challenges of getting that information out of SMEs right at the kind of tail end of their career to make sure their institutional memory, as we often call it, isn't lost when they go. That is something we are going to talk a little bit about as an example on the next slide, as we look at really what I use as a framework for once I've got an SME into a project, how do I make sure that relationship is fruitful for everyone and effective without damaging the buildup of social capital we've already gone through? Step one is defining the relationship. This sounds really obvious, but this is a bit like deciding what your relationship status is on Facebook. Is this a Facebook official relationship you're building, or is this a kind of quiet off to the side relationship? This involves 4 steps. First of all, role. Now, this sounds very easy. I'm the ID, you're the SME. But actually, that's not particularly clear. What do either of those roles mean? You need to clearly define the capacity that that those roles will exist within the project. Because they're not, chances are your SME's job title is not subject matter expert. Their job title may be, I don't know, team leader, contact development. But they're acting as an SME for your course. And that's a prime example of what's going on there with people who are going to leave the business. Chances are they're not professional SMEs. They've just done the job for a very long time. They've become very skilled, very experienced. And that role probably doesn't make any sense to them. It may be the first time in their careers they are acting as SMEs. They may have the view of, this is just the business's attempt to replace me, because they don't understand what's going on and why. And I say may because obviously I don't know the specifics of the person who commented, but broadly speaking, that's one of the really important things to clear up in terms of what is this role? Why does it exist? Why are you an SME versus Sam versus Sally versus anyone else in the business? That can also act as a little bit of an ego boost, a little bit of social capital the other way. You're here because you're fantastic, you're experienced, you're skilled, you have valuable input that we want you to have within the business. Second up is responsibilities. What exactly is the SME responsible for, and what are you responsible for? Again, it's easy to go, they bring the content, I do the learning. The line is not usually that clearly defined. Are they the only person bringing the content? Are you the only person bringing the learning? Do you honestly think as a learning professional, they know nothing about learning, having spent years doing it, to become someone you want to use as an SME? I think it's very easy sometimes to fall into that world of, well, we're the experts, so you will listen to us and we'll do it in this way. But clearly define those responsibilities. And you do want hard lines, but not necessarily directly between content and learning. It may move slightly on different topics, but make sure they are defined and recorded right at the beginning. Next up, input. Who gets input on what? This is so often where projects get messy, because suddenly you've got SMEs deciding what kind of button design they would like, or thinking they need to be, creative geniuses and panicking about it because they're not often. I maintain everyone is creative in their own way, but the expectation to just be creative on demand is not there for a lot of people. So really, really clearly outline what will your SME have input on and what will they not have input on. My personal suggestion is to take off the table things like the visual design and authoring tools, the modality of delivery. Those are really decisions that you stroke maybe a functional SME, if you're lucky enough to have one, should be involved in. But ultimately, the decision should lie with the team that is responsible for rolling this solution out, which is usually you. So really consider sort of boxing those things off as, this is what I'm doing. You won't have input on this. And similarly, for point 4, sign off. Who is signing off what in this project? You're going to want your SME to be signing something off at some point as being, this is factually accurate, this is correct, this is up to date. They need to know, first of all, that they're going to be asked to do that. Second of all, that sign off is not meaningless. It's not just a signature and off it goes. When they sign it off, they are telling you and the business that this is accurate and correct and should be done in this way. And that's really important, that they understand that there are ramifications to you and to the business and the project if sign off is given to something that shouldn't be signed off. If you don't clarify this and tell them exactly what they'll be signing off and what that means, you get into the world of, yep, that's fine, I saw this last week, nothing will have changed. Well, has nothing changed? When the ID polished the language, did he accidentally change the change the meaning of something? This is especially important when working across borders. If you're operating in different countries or across multiple countries, very important to make sure people are clear on who's signing off on what and double checking language more than anything else. So those are the 4 steps of defining that relationship. And I maintain if you get this bit right, you have a much easier time of SME relationships as a whole. If it's defined well at the start, you're winning from day one, and you're not trying to clarify these roles 6 weeks in when the SME doesn't like the shade of blue that you're using, and you don't like their choice of language, let's say. If you know, actually, you get no input on the language and they get no input on the color of blue, everyone's happy. Or if not happy, at least quiet, and you can move forwards with the project. The next thing is kind of the in-flight responsibilities. All of these responsibilities, as far as I'm concerned, lie with us as the L&D professional, because once the project is in flight, we are usually the ones calling the shots. We're the ones saying, I need the SME, I need the graphic designer, I need an animator, I need this, I'm doing that, we're going to move in that direction. It may not always be the case, but usually we're driving the car at that point. And it's really important to remember, therefore, that we are there to help, adapt to, and guide the SME in these conversations and in these relationships. We are not there to simply demand and receive. We're not machines. They're not machines. It doesn't work that way. So it's our responsibility to look after these first 2 sections. Really are all about helping, and that is painting the vision. What does success look like? What are the milestones? Why is this important? Who's it important to? And to provide the map. We need to be able to clearly say, we're going to do this, and then that, and then this, and then we'll have achieved success. Vision and map, always there. They will help everyone involved, but especially help an SME. Thinking back to that, the issue with SMEs, being difficult or not being responsive, that can often be because they do not understand the stakes. How big is this project? What is the impact? Not just of doing it and doing it well, but not doing it. What could happen? Prime example is that the people approaching retirement. What if they leave and take information that they've gleaned over 25, 30 years experience in this job? So what? Everyone else has to be here for 25, 30 years to hopefully get as good? No, of course not. What you want to express to them is that vision of, you're this wealth of knowledge. You're fantastic. You're skilled. You're experienced. It would be a shame to lose all of that when you retire. We really want to, make sure that part of your experience, your efforts, your work that you've put into this company is immortalized so that everyone can continue to benefit from you. That's very difficult to then just ignore. That's a very clearly outlined, this is the danger to the business. Same with the map. If people are not getting back to you, how many times have you gone to them? How many workshops have they sat through? How many times have they potentially told you the same thing? It's important to be aware of that and have a clear map so that you and they know what to expect as you move forwards and understand how much time is going to be expected. So next up, adapting. We've got ownership and simplify. So ownership, we are delivering the project, but we don't own it. This is really important because we often get this thing of, it's my project, I'm responsible for everything, therefore I make the decisions. Well, not really. We may be responsible for it. We're certainly going to get it in the neck if we don't deliver it. But it's really essential, especially with your SME, that you outline the fact that it is our project. We are all working on this, and ownership belongs to the business. And therefore, their input is as valid and as essential as yours. It also means you need to adapt your way of working to them, not the other way around. Instructional designers, L&D professionals, we have some of the most unusual ways of working around. We're probably the only people who work in the way we work within an organization. especially if that organization has been around for a long time and has very established ways of working. So it's essential that you are always willing to adapt your process to the SME, because the SME's life will be absolutely fine without you in this project. Yours will not be fine without them. So be the one who offers to change. Be the one who is willing to step out of their process and say, hey, how can we make this work for you? How can we make this happen? And then simplify. Provide simple and clear guidance on how to be an SME, right? This is almost a training job. You need to, in some way, support and train your SMEs, especially if they've never done it before. Again, thinking about institutional knowledge, but also maybe departments that haven't been around that long in your business, or if the business hasn't done a huge amount of training before or pulled them in as an SME. You wouldn't pull someone out of the business and say, hey, go train this stuff. That would be a horrifying prospect. They know nothing about learning. They have no facilitation skills. They don't know how to design effective slides. Well, the same is true for an SME. How can we just expect them to be an SME? Provide that support. It doesn't look like beating them over the head with a 6-hour workshop, but just some basic pointers. How is the best way to give you information so it's simple and easy to use? Do you want them to put together a glossary ahead of time of any jargon or acronyms that they regularly use within this content? Getting them to do that ahead of time so that they know that's going to be part of the expectation is really, really easy. The guidance sheet I tend to send out is 2 sides of A4. It takes 10 minutes to read. It's big font, lots of pictures. And then I give them templates for everything. If I ask them for content, I send them a template and say, hey, can you break the content down into logical sections, put it there. There's a glossary on the back so that you can fill out just with any kind of acronyms or, industry specific language I might not be aware of that you obviously know. Make their life as easy and simple as possible. That took me maybe 2 hours to create, and I've used it on in excess of 40 projects. That's 40, probably more than 40, because I've often got more than one SME on a project, but at least 40 SMEs whose life I've made a little bit easier. Again, social capital, paying into it and getting out of it roughly equal in that scenario. But more importantly than that, my own life became easier as well, because I knew what format my content would come to me in. So last up, guide, communicate and lead. So communication it's fairly simple, but I think that masks practicalities that we need to look at and consider. So my suggestion is to use stand-ups, town halls, and kind of, working to a certain extent, lunches, to have constant conversations. Now, stand-ups vary from project to project. I remain a big fan of a daily stand-up. It's kind of the buzzword of the century, right? Work in an agile way in L&D. But one thing we should definitely take from agile is the concept of stand-ups. Doesn't need to be a long meeting, doesn't mean to be an update from everyone. It just needs to be okay, everyone, here's where the project is, here's what's on the horizon, here's what we've now finished. It keeps everyone in the loop. Stand-ups, even if they're impractical, maybe so 3 people out of 10 can't come each day, they can then get an email stand-up first thing from the project manager saying, here's where the project is, it's at this stage, here's what's coming up over the next 7 days, here's what happened over the last 7 days. No one can ever say they're unaware of what's going on in the project if you hold stand-ups.
Tom, may I jump in and interrupt for just a second, saying that we have about 13 minutes left till the end of the session. I hope this matches your timing. And judging by the number of comments we're getting in the chat, it feels like people are really, really willing to ask questions. So let's try to take it closer to the end to leave some space for questions and answers.
I've got maybe 2 minutes of content left, so good. I'm glad that timed out quite well. So lead, I'll jump into lead, and that's step outside of your process. We've already kind of touched on this, but it's not just about the on the way and about getting the information. It is about morale as well. No one likes to be forced into ways of working they're unfamiliar with. The last thing, and it kind of links back right to the beginning when we spoke about it, is wrap up and review. When a project finishes, first thing you want to do is celebrate success. Get the beers in, get pizza, have a party, or just sit and have a cup of tea for 5 minutes and congratulate each other on a job well done, and include every SME that helped you get there. It is very easy to just include the people who were there at the end of the project. Don't go right the way back. Include the PM, include the project sponsors. Even if you've got a sentinel SME, get them in as well. Celebrate your success. Share feedback. Offer honest feedback and ask for it in return. Don't just be the one doling it out. Do run a workshop. Workshop and really look at lessons learned. Get everyone together in a room and think, if we were going to make that decision again, what would we do differently? Go right the way back through the project. And finally, take some time yourself to reflect on the project. The end result may have been successful, but was the project as a whole successful? Would you want to do it again? Were you happy with things that happened in the project? Always double that back on yourself. I always say arrow in before arrow out. Until you know otherwise, assume you are the problem. Because then you're never likely to go, oh, well, it's just a difficult SME. Oh, it's just a difficult project. Oh, if you keep saying that, consider if you are potentially the thing making those situations difficult. Won't always be the case, but it's certainly where you should start. So those are our 4 points. We looked at types and motivations. We defined the role and responsibility. We helped, adapted, and guided the SME. And we finished with a wrap-up. If you're still here, congratulations. You didn't fall asleep. I know I'm terrible for that, especially it's warm, it's late. I would get it. I would understand. If you do want more, check me out on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter. I mean, Twitter's mostly just stuff that I've broken and share. But I'm always happy to chat. And other than that, let's do some questions.
We definitely will try to utilize the time left, apart from, again, dozens of thanks and comments about your beard. I have received several questions. Tom, I have received more beard comments than questions. Honestly, I'll be honest with you. But let's focus on the questions first, right? And then the rest of the questions will be discussed in your Twitter or in your LinkedIn or wherever.
Yeah, sure.
You can entertain these types of questions. So I kept a couple of comments rather than questions in the chat as well, just to be sure that you want to maybe, kind of build upon the comment because it feels like there is something in it. So, for example, from David, we have received a comment that says, being new to this position and reading the chat, it seems like a good rapport between the ID and the SME would aid in the process of completing the task for the ICENT. And Haley has answered that it is absolutely essential. In my experience, she says, if they absolutely dislike you, they will sabotage you. It feels like maybe you want to give a little comment to this little dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, again, I can only speak from my experience. I think I've only ever had one SME that was like that, and it was at least partially my fault, because ultimately we both worked in the same business. I think usually if a bad relationship has a cause. Very rarely there are obviously some situations that doesn't apply to. Some people are just unpleasant, and that's unfortunate. But I think as long as you can say, hey, I did everything I could, there was nothing else I could reasonably do to try and make this relationship work, then that's all any business can ask. But yes, I would certainly agree that without a good, effective working SME relationship, projects will never be as successful as they could be, and more often than not will actually fail.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this comment. I think this actually is very valuable. Much more is kept behind the scenes. So feels like this kind of comments or help reveal the truth. So we have one more question. Actually, it is a question. Are you able to share your 2-page template with us?
We kind of and ahed a little bit about that. I'm going to say I need to edit it. slightly.
Mhm.
There's just some stuff in there that is very us specific. But broadly, yes, I'm more than happy to send that out and share that. If I send that over to the lovely people at iSpring, I'm sure they can find a way to deliver it to all of you.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. Thank you so much. I keep receiving comments that the presentation was as pretty as your beard. So it feels like the beard topic is as at least no less exciting than the topic of building the relationship with your SMEs. They
definitely help. Yeah. That's if you haven't got your own, buy one, attach it. You'll have a much better relationship instantly.
It's like Samson was receiving power from the earth while he was touching the earth. You might be receiving your power from the beard. I don't know if that's how it works in the UK. Probably we should research more about that. So, Hallie commented that you answered all of the questions she had and she wasn't even able to ask them. So this is good to know. So we also keep receiving comments that the session was really worthwhile, and it feels like most of the questions were already answered during the session itself. So while we are still receiving just so many thank you comments, I would probably like to use this time to ask you a question on my side, if you don't mind. So I was wondering if you, for example, if an SME wants to dictate the project beyond their remit, what would you do? Like, what would be your reaction? What would be your approach to deal with that?
So again, this answer assumes a reasonably good existing relationship. If they're trying to overstep the remit, it's got to be, okay, let's have a really open, honest conversation. Here are the roles that we defined. We agreed to this at the start of the project. Here's why you aren't involved in input on this or sign off on that. Let me again assume I'm in the wrong till I know otherwise, and say, here's why this is being done this way. Let's assume it's the color blue. It's the brand color blue. And we're using it because we want it to align with the rest of the organization. Explain the decision and then say, this isn't actually something that we're going to be open to changing, unless there's something I'm unaware of. Give them the opportunity to maybe be that person to go, well, actually, I spoke to brand yesterday and they're about to rebrand the whole business. And you go, didn't want to miss out on that information. But don't leave the door open to say, well, hey, if you just fancy changing it, let's do it. Once you do that once, you'll never stop. This is why I said friendly, not friends during the conversation. There does come a time when you have to be able to say, no, you don't have input on this. Here's why we agreed to it at the start. Again, the importance of that framework. And here's why we're doing it this way, even though we're not open to changing it at this time. Always explain yourself. Don't just say no and walk off, which I've literally seen happen. And I get the sentiment. They're not involved. It's not up to them. They don't know anything about that. But it doesn't mean you still shouldn't explain rather than just say no.
Yeah, taking the responsibility to be understood, not to just say, right?
Exactly.
Well, it feels like all of these comments that you're giving are nicely falling not only into the realm of SME relationship, but also into the general golden rules of communications and negotiations, right? So it feels like
Absolutely.
This is indeed what one of our participants noted. Leadership courses might be helpful, business communication course might be helpful, and negotiation courses as well might be helpful. Let's have a quick look at one last question that we've received, and I think I'll be happy to give you the floor for the last comment to emphasize one last idea which you want people to take away from this incredibly helpful session. Sean asks, there is any quick suggestion that you might give on how to build relationships with SMEs you won't ever get a chance to meet in person? Because I love in-person engagement, I can struggle with building solely virtual relationships.
Do you know what? It's so difficult. But I would say try and hold, if you're never going to meet them in person at all, take a non-work virtual meeting. And by that, I mean, if you usually use Microsoft Teams, get them to come and meet you on a Google Meet. And choose carefully whether you want video or just audio, but just invite them for a virtual coffee. I quite enjoy that. Also include them. What do you do with your team if you're all remote? So a prime example is my business. Every Thursday night, we have games night. We play D&D and board games. We're all remote. We're all over the world. We do it on Discord. We will invite SMEs in a project that we're working on to come and join us. They're part of the team at that point. Look for those ways. You have to be a bit more, I would say, creative. And some of them won't be into, joining for a D&D session or a board game. Some of them might just say, hey, I just want to get on with the job. That's still a good relationship. Go in there and just have that really open, honest chat with them. I think it can be tricky if you aren't comfortable doing this over the internet, but just trust in the fact that two humans can connect in anywhere, whether it's just over the phone. I mean, whether you're writing letters and emails to each other, people have connected on a human level in this way for a long, long time. People used to connect very emotionally in a very long-term way just through written letters that took weeks to go each way. So don't underestimate your own inbuilt human ability to build a connection with another human just because you're not in the same room. Just be creative and step away from the we are at work mindset of building a relationship. Use a different platform, try different things, even down to dressing casually. Can make a big difference in how that first call is perceived.
Right, absolutely. Try wearing a fake beard, as we have already learned from you.
That will definitely help. Yep.
If you don't have one yourself, right? Always impresses me and makes me very inspired how people manage to communicate, even though they are in very different cultures, geographies, speak different languages, use translations or any other means of communication and still manage to be efficient. So if you are sharing a similar geography, similar culture, similar language, or one and the same language, feels like, you've got all the chances to be successful in your communication. So yeah, think out of the box. I think this is a very valuable takeaway that we can have. So Tom, would you like to close your session by one last statement?
Oh, I will. And I'm going to finish on the one that I mentioned last. Arrow in before arrow out. Always be willing to assume you're the problem in the relationship before you blame the other person.
Yeah, it goes very well along with your commendation of being mindful and thoughtful in your answers, being mindful and thoughtful in whatever conflict you have, that be small or big, right? Thank you so much, Tom. I personally enjoyed it immensely. It has nothing to do with your beard, believe me. It has so much to do with your charisma and your content. So I really appreciate all your effort and your input. So let us just thank Tom again by a virtual round of applause and all your thankful comments. I'm sure after the session, he will open the chat and will swim in the waves of your support and of the appreciation.